April 29, 1945. Milan, Italy. A massive crowd has gathered in Piazzale Loreto. People are screaming. Others are laughing. Some are crying. Everyone is staring at the same horrifying sight. Hanging upside down from a steel beam is the corpse of a man who once ruled Italy with absolute power. A man who demanded obedience. A man who dreamed of rebuilding the Roman Empire. A man who was worshipped by millions. Women spit on his body. Men kick his corpse. Others fire bullets into him even though he is already dead. For 20 years, nobody dared insult him. Now an entire nation is celebrating his destruction. His name was Benito Mussolini. And what makes this story so shocking is that none of this was supposed to happen. Just a few years earlier, he appeared unstoppable. He controlled newspapers. He controlled schools. He controlled the police. He controlled the army. Children were taught to worship him. Crowds chanted his name. Foreign leaders admired him. Even Adolf Hitler looked up to him. So how does a man go from being one of the most powerful leaders in Europe to hanging upside down in a public square? How does a poor blacksmith's son become the founder of fascism? How does a socialist revolutionary become a dictator? And how does a dream of empire end in complete humiliation? This is the rise and ruin of Benito Mussolini. The man who taught Europe how dictators seize power. And the man who lost everything. Long before he ruled Italy. Long before fascism. Long before millions saluted his name. Benito Mussolini was just a troubled boy from a small village, and almost no one believed he would amount to anything. Born on July 29, 1883, in Predoppio, northern Italy, Benito Amilcare Andrea Mussolini came from a divided home. His father was a socialist blacksmith. His mother, a strict Catholic schoolteacher. From both, he inherited intensity, intelligence, ambition, and independence, but also anger. He was violent, quick-tempered, and refused to obey authority. Teachers struggled to control him. Classmates feared him. He was expelled from several schools after attacking students, including incidents involving a knife. Every attempt to discipline him only made him more defiant. As a young man, he drifted through jobs before discovering his real strength, words. He was sharp, persuasive, and capable of stirring emotions in crowds. Soon, he entered socialist politics. Italy at the time was unstable, poverty, strikes, and political tension everywhere. Mussolini thrived in that chaos. He became a journalist and activist, quickly rising as one of the most outspoken socialist voices in the country. His speeches attacked the government, the wealthy, and the system itself. Authorities arrested him multiple times for inciting unrest, but each arrest only made him more famous. By his early 30s, he was becoming a national figure. Ironically, the man who would later build fascism once rejected everything it stood for. He opposed nationalism. He opposed dictatorship. He condemned war. But history was about to reshape him. In 1914, Europe entered World War I, a conflict that would destroy empires and transform Mussolini forever. The rebellious socialist was about to reinvent himself. And the consequences would change Italy, and the world. World War I changed Benito Mussolini forever. Before the war, he was one of Italy's most outspoken socialist voices. He condemned nationalism, rejected military conflict, and believed workers should unite across borders. Then everything changed. As Europe moved toward war, Mussolini shocked his supporters by abandoning his anti-war stance and calling for Italy to join the conflict. It destroyed his relationship with the socialist movement. Former allies called him a traitor, and he was expelled from the party. But Mussolini no longer cared. He had begun to believe war could reshape nations, and he intended to reshape Italy. When World War I ended in 1918, Italy was left disappointed. Despite being on the winning side, many felt betrayed by the peace. The economy collapsed, unemployment rose, strikes spread, and political violence filled the streets. To many Italians, democracy looked weak and ineffective. Mussolini saw his opening. In 1919, he founded a new movement unlike anything Europe had seen before: fascism. It promised strength, discipline, national unity, and above all, action. He rejected both socialism and liberal democracy, positioning himself as the man who could restore order and rebuild Italy's power. His followers, the black shirts, wore black uniforms and marched through towns attacking opponents, breaking strikes, and silencing resistance through violence. To supporters, they were protectors of Italy. To opponents, they were feared street militias. But their influence spread quickly. As chaos grew, so did Mussolini's appeal. Business leaders backed him. Nationalists supported him. Even politicians believed they could control him. They were wrong. By 1922, Mussolini made his move. Thousands of black shirts marched toward Rome in what became known as the March on Rome. Italy stood on the edge of collapse. The government hesitated. The army prepared. Civil war seemed possible. Then came the decision that changed everything. King Victor Emmanuel III refused to order a crackdown. Afraid of bloodshed, he instead invited Mussolini to form a government. At just 39 years old, the former socialist agitator became Prime Minister of Italy. He hadn't seized power by force. He had been handed it. And once inside the system, he never intended to leave. When Benito Mussolini became Prime Minister in 1922, many Italians believed they could control him. They were wrong. Over the next few years, he systematically dismantled Italy's democracy piece by piece. The turning point came in 1924. A socialist politician, Giacomo Matteotti, openly accused the fascists of election fraud and violence. Days later, he was kidnapped and murdered. The scandal shook Italy. For a moment, it looked like Mussolini's government might collapse. Instead, he struck back. In January 1925, Mussolini stood before Parliament and effectively declared himself dictator. From that moment on, Italy was no longer a democracy. Opposition parties were banned. Independent newspapers were shut down. Critics were arrested, beaten, or forced into exile. A secret police network monitored citizens and crushed dissent. Fear became the foundation of his rule. But repression was only half the strategy. Mussolini understood that people obey more willingly when they believe in a leader, so he built one of the most powerful propaganda systems in Europe. He was no longer just a politician. He became Il Duce, the leader. His image appeared everywhere: posters, schools, newspapers, government buildings. Children were taught to admire him. Teachers praised him. Journalists glorified him. At the same time, his government launched major public works projects: roads, bridges, drainage systems, and agricultural reforms. Whether fully real or carefully exaggerated, they helped create the image of a nation returning to order. The slogan that, "He made the trains run on time," became part of his myth. By the 1930s, his cult of personality had reached extreme levels. Mass rallies filled city squares. Crowds chanted his name. Statues and portraits spread across Italy. He appeared as a soldier, a worker, a pilot. Whatever image the nation needed, he became it. For many Italians, it felt like strength had returned. The economy seemed stable. The regime looked powerful. And Mussolini's popularity soared. By the mid-1930s, he stood at the peak of his power. But that success created a dangerous shift. Mussolini no longer wanted to be remembered as Italy's leader. He wanted to be remembered as a conqueror. A modern Caesar. the man who would rebuild the Roman Empire. And that ambition would lead him toward his greatest mistake. By the mid-1930s, Benito Mussolini appeared unstoppable. The rebellious troublemaker from Predoppio had become one of the most powerful men in Europe. Millions of Italians admired him. Foreign leaders respected him. And fascism seemed, at least on the surface, to be working. He had crushed political opposition, built a powerful cult of personality, and convinced much of Italy that a new era of strength had begun. But Mussolini no longer wanted just power. He wanted legacy. He wanted conquest. And above all, he wanted to be remembered as a modern Caesar. For years, he had been obsessed with the Roman Empire, its victories, its emperors, its legacy. Now he wanted to rebuild it. In 1935, he made his boldest move yet, the invasion of Ethiopia. The war was brutal and one-sided. Italy's military advantage in weapons and air power was overwhelming, and international condemnation followed as chemical weapons were used in the campaign. By 1936, Ethiopia had fallen. Crowds in Italy celebrated. Parades filled the streets. Newspapers called Mussolini a conqueror. For a moment, it looked like the Roman Empire had returned. This was the peak of his power, the moment he believed history was finally on his side. But around this time, another force was rising in Europe. Adolf Hitler. At first, Hitler admired Mussolini, studying fascism and copying its methods. Mussolini saw himself as the senior partner, the experienced leader shaping a rising Germany. But the balance of power was already shifting. Germany was growing faster, stronger, and more militarized. And slowly, Mussolini found himself relying on the very nation he once overshadowed. Still, he ignored the warning signs. His early successes had made him overconfident. He believed Italy's army could match any enemy. He believed expansion through war was still possible. By the late 1930s, Mussolini stood at the height of his influence. His regime looked stable. His enemies seemed silent. His people celebrated him. The dream of a new Roman Empire felt within reach. But history rarely rewards overconfidence. Beyond Italy's borders, Europe was sliding toward catastrophe, one that would expose the cracks beneath Mussolini's image of strength. And in 1940, chasing glory and empire, Benito Mussolini made the decision that would define his downfall. He entered World War II on Hitler's side. The rise was complete. The ruin was about to begin. When Benito Mussolini entered World War II in June 1940, he expected a quick and glorious victory. Germany seemed unstoppable. France was collapsing. And Mussolini believed Italy would gain its share of the spoils before the war ended. He imagined new territories, new colonies, and a reborn Roman Empire stretching across the Mediterranean. Instead, he had just signed the beginning of his downfall. Behind the propaganda, Italy was not ready for modern war. Its industry lagged behind other powers. Its military lacked fuel, equipment, and modern weapons. Many soldiers were poorly trained and poorly supplied. Yet Mussolini pushed forward. The results were disastrous. In Greece, Italy launched an invasion expecting an easy victory, but was humiliated and pushed back, forcing Hitler to intervene. In North Africa, Italian forces suffered repeated defeats against the British, losing territory Mussolini had hoped to claim. Then came the Eastern Front. To prove loyalty to Hitler, Mussolini sent troops into the invasion of the Soviet Union. The results were catastrophic. Thousands froze, starved, or died in brutal fighting, and entire units were wiped out. With each defeat, Mussolini's image weakened. The man who promised strength now delivered failure. The man who promised empire delivered endless war. Inside Italy, support collapsed. Food shortages spread. The economy worsened. Bombs fell on cities. Many Italians began to question whether Mussolini was leading them to disaster. By 1943, the situation was desperate. The Allies had gained momentum across Europe and North Africa. Then in July, they landed in Sicily. The invasion shocked Italy. Even Mussolini's own government realized the war was lost. On July 24, 1943, the Fascist Grand Council met in a tense late-night session. Many who once supported Mussolini turned against him and voted to remove him from power. The next day, he met King Victor Emmanuel III expecting routine talks. Instead, he was arrested. No resistance. No army. No supporters. The man who built fascism had been abandoned by his own system. Soon after, German forces staged a daring rescue in September 1943, freeing Mussolini and flying him to safety. But he was no longer a true leader. Hitler installed him as head of a puppet government in northern Italy. On paper he ruled, but in reality he answered to Germany. His empire was gone. His authority was gone. And as Allied forces advanced, the final collapse was inevitable. The rise of Benito Mussolini was over. Only ruin remained. By the spring of 1945, Benito Mussolini's world had completely collapsed. The fascist empire he promised was gone. German forces were retreating across Europe. Allied armies were advancing from the south. Partisan fighters controlled much of northern Italy. The man who once ruled as Il Duce was now a fugitive. After more than 20 years in power, Mussolini was no longer a dictator, he was simply trying to survive. As defeat became inevitable, he abandoned all hope of victory. His only goal was escape. Alongside his mistress, Clara Petacci, he joined a convoy of retreating German soldiers heading toward the Swiss border. Some reports suggest he even disguised himself in a German uniform to avoid detection. But it was a desperate attempt from a man running out of time. On April 27, 1945, near Lake Como, Italian partisans stopped the convoy. As they searched the vehicles, they discovered Mussolini hiding among the Germans. News of his capture spread quickly. For many Italians, it was justice. Years of war, bombings, and hardship had left deep anger toward the man they blamed for their suffering. The next day, April 28, Mussolini and Clara Petacci were taken to Giuliano di Mezzegra and executed by partisan fighters. There were no speeches. No crowds. No ceremony. Just gunfire and silence. But the humiliation did not end there. Their bodies were transported to Milan and taken to Piazzale Loreto, a place already marked by revenge. Fascist forces had previously displayed the bodies of executed resistance fighters there. Now history had turned. Mussolini's corpse was thrown before an angry crowd. Thousands gathered. Some spat. Others kicked the bodies. Years of anger, fear, and grief erupted at once. Then came the final act of humiliation. Mussolini, Petacci, and other fascist officials were hung upside down from a metal structure at a fuel station. Photographs of the scene spread across the world. The man who once styled himself as a modern Caesar now hung lifeless before the people he ruled. The leader who promised empire. The dictator who demanded obedience. The man who dreamed of restoring Rome. Had fallen further than almost any modern ruler in history. For decades, Mussolini had built an image of strength. In the end, it all collapsed. His allies abandoned him. His people abandoned him. And the empire he dreamed of vanished with him. The rise had been extraordinary. The fall was absolute. And in Piazzale Loreto, Benito Mussolini became not a symbol of power, but of total ruin. When Benito Mussolini died in April 1945, the dream he had spent more than 20 years building died with him. The man who promised to restore Italy's greatness left his country devastated by war, destruction, and defeat. The empire he dreamed of creating never truly existed. The glory he promised never arrived. Yet Mussolini's influence extended far beyond Italy. He created fascism, a political ideology built on extreme nationalism, authoritarian rule, propaganda, and the cult of a single leader. His methods inspired movements across Europe, including Adolf Hitler's regime in Germany. In that sense, Mussolini helped shape some of the darkest chapters of the 20th century. But history is full of irony. Mussolini wanted to be remembered as a modern Caesar. A conqueror. A visionary. A leader who would restore the greatness of ancient Rome. Instead, he became a warning. His story shows how fear can be turned into power. How propaganda can shape entire nations. And how unchecked ambition can lead to catastrophe. For years, millions cheered him. They saw strength, confidence, and promises of a better future. But the same leader who appeared unstoppable ended his life fleeing in disguise. The empire collapsed. The image shattered. And the dictator who demanded absolute loyalty was abandoned by almost everyone. Few leaders have risen so high. And few have fallen so completely. He promised greatness. He delivered ruin. He promised empire. He delivered disaster. And that is why the story of Benito Mussolini still matters today. Because it is more than the story of one man. It is a warning written in the rise and ruin of Benito Mussolini. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and turn on notifications. Next we'll cover another ruler who tasted both glory and total destruction. Comment below. Who should be due next?